The ultimate history lesson is a story of evolutionary history. Now, evolution is the process of a biological population changing very slowly over a big portion of time. This is driven by natural selection, which is the process of only the strong surviving, or Darwinism as we know it. Natural selection is driven by mutation and random variation in the genes of a biological entity. So when a mutation arises, if that mutation is beneficial, then it'll stay and more of that species will be born with that mutation. Now, the Earth was formed 4.6 billion years ago, and that's a pretty big number. So to put that in perspective, think about the distance from Presque Isle to McCarty's Cove. Now, fish first appeared on the Earth 600 million years ago. Compared to Presque Isle versus McCarty's Cove, that would be 600 meters in the big scheme of things. Now, if we break that down even further, humans first broke off from their primate ancestors, which would be about here, 6 million years ago. Now, on our scale, 6 million years ago would be 6 meters, which is pretty minuscule compared to 4.6 billion years. Take that a little further, the advent of agriculture was 10,000 years ago, which on this scale doesn't even show up, and on our scale would be 1 centimeter. Now, before the advent of agriculture, we were largely a people of hunter-gatherer societies. This means that you would go out, you hunt for your animal, you eat the animal, you gather, you forage for berries, and that's about it. And that was pretty much what you ate, and your entire life's purpose was dedicated to finding food, eating food, maybe some rituals and reproducing, and that's about it. When we introduced agriculture and animal husbandry 10,000 years ago into the earth, we actually altered the nutrient characteristics of formerly wild foods. Now slowly we picked to have the biggest fruits, the biggest flowers, the biggest plants because we wanted the foods that produced the most nutrients. So we've actually changed the structure of the plants that are around and the animals that are around today. To highlight this, we have the teosinte, which is a plant that existed in hunter-gatherer societies and exists today still in some very, very remote areas, but it's basically the ancestor of corn. And if you look at the size of this corn, it's about the size of a quarter. Compared to the size of corn today, it's grown a lot. So basically we are only picking for the biggest and the biggest and the biggest until the point where we've completely altered the way that this plant looks. 150 years ago, the Industrial Revolution came about, which has allowed mass production of these agricultural products. But that process, which includes high heat, pressing, and extracting nutrients, has actually stripped those nutrients from the plants. Therefore, today our food is lower in nutrients than it ever has been, and our crops truly hardly resemble the crops that were around 10,000 years ago. Now keep in mind that 10,000 years ago is a centimeter compared to the 6 meters of human development. So what's new? Biggest thing that's new is dairy. Now all mammals have a certain suckling period, but after that period ends, it's pretty much impossible to receive any form of dairy. Now obviously we cultivate cows and we get the dairy from them, and that's how we get milk and cheese and all these other products, but that's pretty unnatural because 10,000 years ago we weren't able to do that. Next we have cereal and grains. Now wild cereals are small, difficult to harvest, and pretty much undigestible. So in order for us to eat these grains, and by grains and cereals, I mean bread, rice, pasta, any sort of grain that you can think of. This is pretty much a very minimal part of hunter-gatherers' diet until 5,000 years ago, and that's when we started to actually eat a lot more grains. Cereals were ground with stone and just plain milling tools at that point, and it was not a very efficient way to get nutrients. So then when the Industrial Revolution came around, we have mechanized steel roller mills and automated sifting devices that really allowed us to eat grain on a normal basis, on an everyday basis. We didn't see widespread consumption of these highly refined grain flours until 150 to 200 years ago. Now, 85.3% of the cereal grains consumed in the U.S. are highly refined grains. Refined sugar was next. The only thing even close to refined sugar in hunter-gatherer societies would be honey. And in order to get honey, think about it, they had to run into a beehive and endure thousands of stings in order to get that honey. And they loved it, so they would actually do that. So there are accounts of this happening, which to me is a pretty funny thing. But that was pretty rare. In the Aboriginal people of Australia, they might have eaten 2 kilograms per year of honey, and that would be mostly a feast. Since then, the qualitative features of sugars have changed drastically because now we have high fructose corn syrup, and that's what most of our sugar consumption comes from. Next are vegetable oils. Now, vegetable oils were first made from walnuts, almonds, olives, sesame seeds, and flax seeds, and this was done by using a rending and a pressing process as early as 6,000 years ago. However, most of these oils were used for lubricants, body lotion, things like that. They might have consumed some olive oil, but it was pretty minimal. With the advent of the Industrial Revolution, we were able to use mechanically driven steel expellers and hexane extraction in order to utilize solvent extraction, which is a technique in order to produce large amounts of oils. Now that doesn't really sound like something you'd want to put in your body because that's a lot of processing. Additionally, the process of hydrogenation produces trans fat, which we all know is no good for anybody. Finally, we have salt. The earliest use of salt was 8,000 years ago in China. No hunter-gatherer societies use salt, though today the average American consumes about 9.6 grams of salt per day. 10% of this salt comes from natural sources from the actual food themselves. 15% of that salt comes from discretionary sources, which would be you putting the salt on your food. 75% of those 10 grams of salt come from salt additives, which would be the nitrates in your hot dogs and all these other preservatives that we have in our food. So to bring this all together, dairy products, cereal grains, refined sugars, refined vegetable oils, and salt make up 80.3% of the modern U.S. diet. So that means that 4/5 of the nutrients consumed by us humans in America, modern, highly evolved, and intelligent humans, were not consumed prior to 10,000 years ago. So this is just some big food for thought. It's taken us 6 million years to get to where we are from our primate ancestors, which is 6 meters. And now, 80% of our diet is coming from something that was not available 10,000 years ago, which is 1 centimeter compared to those 6 meters. Thank you.